Welcome to this video on object-oriented programming in Python, and in this lesson we'll be specifically looking at multiple inheritance. In the last lesson, or the last video, we looked at single inheritance. We looked at Gregor Mendel and the idea that you could have two classes, say class B, which inherits all the attributes and the methods from class A, and that was single inheritance. What we're going to be looking at today is multiple inheritance. Now if you think about the example that we gave in the previous video about playing chess and assuming that your father played chess and you inherited this trait. Now it's also possible that you inherited traits or characteristics from multiple people. For instance, it's possible that your father played chess and your mother played the piano, and you, lucky son or daughter, inherited both these traits from two different parents. Now this is basically what multiple inheritance looks like. So where you have single inheritance, where a subclass inherits the features of one superclass, in multiple inheritance, one class can have more than one superclass and inherit features from all the parent classes. I don't usually like bats, but this is an interesting example of multiple inheritance. You have the creature called a bat, and interestingly, the bat is a bit like a mammal, so it inherits many of the features of a mammal. In fact, it is a mammal, but it also has wings, which many mammals don't have, and therefore it also inherits the attributes and the methods of what we might call a winged animal. There's an example of multiple inheritance. An example that we're going to code in a minute would look like this. Now we have three levels here. We have a person. A student is also a person. So if a person has a name and an age, a student also inherits those attributes. A student has a name and an age. But a student would also then have additional attributes, such as, in this case, maybe test scores, student ID, etc. We then could have enrolled. Now, students who have enrolled are obviously students, also people, and so therefore this particular class, as you can see, inherits from both person, the person class, and the student class. Now that is an example of multiple inheritance. So you have the attributes of the person class, the attributes of the student class there, and as you can see, the enrolled class inherits both the attributes that have been declared in these two classes. And the official word really that we use is extend. So the enrolled class extends both the person and the student class, deriving all the attributes and methods. Of course, it can also have its own attributes. In this case, we have self-enrolled. So you have single inheritance. We're now looking at multiple inheritance. That was how we showed or arrived at single inheritance. You simply put the parent class in brackets, and quite simply, really to extend that, you put both the classes that you are inheriting from, if you're dealing with multiple inheritance. So if we look at an example, we could create a class person, as we just saw, and define our init function, have the person's name and the person's age. Now most people have a name and an age. We could also then have, so I'll just complete that, a method such as showName, just so we can see what we're doing. We could have showAge as well. And that's done. Now we could define another class, and this class we're going to call student. We have our init method, in which we'll have, of course, the self parameter, which is always there, but additional parameters such as student ID and a subject. Now we're assuming this student is a person, of course, so the student could inherit from the person class, but we'll just leave it for now to demonstrate multiple inheritance. And let's have a look at this. This is student ID. And then we can have a little method which said get ID. Of course, you could have another method which had get subject as well. Now let's get into the class which is going to inherit from both person and student. This is exciting, and we're going to have class enrolled, and here we have person and student. So the enrolled class extends both person and student. It's quite important to note here the order in which these are declared. So if you had a clash, if you had, for instance, the student class had a name attribute, as did the person had a name attribute, the one that would show up would really depend on this order. So it's just something worth remembering, that the order does matter, and you can play around with that at some point. So in this, we're going to define our init method. Let's have a number of attributes: age, student ID, all the ones we've just created, subject, and add another attribute called enrolled date. Now, here we are referring to the person and student classes, and that's the way that you do that. We can have an individual little method for this enrolled class, such as return something really simple, like return the enrolled date. Now, at this point, it would be useful to demonstrate how the multiple inheritance works, or indeed if it does work. You can see the notes for why this is used. You don't have to really use it, but it's useful. And let's start by creating a little object of the subclass enrolled. Calling it with the parameters joblogs 33 enrollment date. If I called the method, which has been declared in the person class, which is showName, keeping in mind that I'm just referring to this particular subclass, we should get something happening once we've dealt with any syntax errors. So in this case it says enrolled object has no attribute name, which suggests it's not actually recognizing the name